Hello and a very good evening to all of you. And welcome to the first session of the Undergrad, which is a project conducted by the Rotary Club of Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. Since this is the first session, I would like to give you a brief introduction for this project Undergrad as to what made us start this project. So what we realized, what is a well-known fact, is that there's a huge gap between the education system that we see in schools and the education system in universities. So that is why that is the main reason why many of the students find it very difficult when transiting from the school-based learning system to the university system. And one main reason for this is the emphasis on self-learning that is placed in universities, which is not found in school-based learning. In addition, there's increased workload. There are a lot of things that the student has to study in universities, and also the different modalities that are available for learning. So all these reasons can make it quite challenging for an undergraduate. And it is our aim through this project to provide some of the essential skills that could help an undergraduate to guide through their academic career and at the end to become successful individuals. So throughout this project, over the following weeks, we'll be teaching you separate skills, but rather than just teaching you, we'll also be providing you an opportunity to practice the things that you learn through this session. So we have been able to get down some of the many distinguished resource persons for our sessions. And once you gain some skills from these sessions, you would then be able to practice what you learn through the different activities that we have planned out for you. So stay tuned for everything. It will be an exciting journey. So during this first session, we'll be on learning how to learn. We'll be focusing on effective learning techniques, because all of us know, all of us study in some way, but is it effective? Can you call that based on the amount of time that you spend on it? Do you get the expected amount of results? So you all must be having some questions, and I hope through this session, so pay close attention, and you will be able to gain some valuable skills that will help you throughout your undergraduate career. And at the end of this session, we'll also be having a short post quiz that will be, the link to which will be posted in the chat at the end of the session. And you are expected to complete that quiz in order to get the post-course certificate that we have planned. So pay attention to this session from the beginning. You'll learn a lot, and then you will be able to apply what you learn in the sessions to come. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our resource person for the day. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our distinguished resource person, Professor Saroj Jaisinghan. He is an emeritus professor of medicine at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, and a consultant to the Department of Medicine, University of Sabarkand. He was one of the longest serving consultants at the National Hospital of Sri Lanka, and he has taught generations of undergraduates and postgraduates. He was also the founding director of the Medical Education Development and Research Center, also known as MEDAC. He completed his A-levels and became All Ireland second in the biology stream. Following this, he completed his final MBBS studies in 1979 at Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, with the first-class honors and was placed second in the merit list. He joined the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo as a lecturer in 1982. After this, he completed his MD in General Medicine at the University of Colombo and was placed first in this examination. In addition to all this, he is an experienced examiner at all levels of undergraduate exams, MD, postgraduate exams, MRCP, and PhDs. So I hope you all would agree, who else is better than him for us to learn about effective learning techniques. So we warmly welcome you, sir, to this session. It's actually a great honor to have you joining us this session. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you very, very much for inviting me. It's great to be back. And I hope we could have some interesting exchanges of views. A minor correction, I didn't get a first class in my finals. I got a second upper. And the person who topped the batch was none other than Dr. Ruan Ekanayak, the famous cardiologist, who is a very close friend of mine. Okay, so learning to learn is the topic today. And I have selected a few areas. Of course, we have limited time. So I've selected a few areas to try and focus on how we learn about learning, or what we should know about learning, so that it's, you might have to change some of the habits you have acquired all these years in school. So let's try to look at it in a selective way. I won't be able to cover everything, but some selective areas. So if you look at a medical undergraduate, you have learning in relation to the faculty, and also learning in relation to the hospital. Okay, so we have in the faculty, we have lectures, we have in addition, that's one of the main areas, especially in your at the beginning when you start your course. There'll be small group discussion, tutorials, laboratory. I'm not dealing with everything. So lectures is one large chunk. Then how do we study? Again, especially in relation to the lectures and the textbooks and your notes. And finally, how you prepare. Then a few things, if we have time, we'll get on to the hospital environment and learning in a clinical setting. Those are separate areas of a separate topic, actually. So let's see if we can focus on the first part more, right? So as I mentioned, in the faculty, you have all these lectures, notes, textbooks, small group discussions, tutorials, and so on. And there is a transition from the sort of things you did in up to A-level, and now what you're going to do in the faculty. This transition would be in several areas. You will have new friends, you have less number of people whom you have known before. Those who are coming from single-sex schools will suddenly find that you're in the midst of the opposite sex, and you will note that the type of teaching is different. You are supposed to do your own teaching, and the questions are more applied questions, and you are unable to memorize and answer some of those questions. You have to understand them. And the syllabus looks huge. And also, there is an important transition in relation to language. Some of you would have learned in Sinhala or Tamil up to A-level, and now everything happens in English. So there's a lot of transition during this period. So in this, as we go along, we get used to what's happening, and it's first few months which are difficult, but after that, you start to get adjusted to these. So now let's look at these three areas. What would happen in the lectures? How should you be studying? Lecture notes or your textbooks, and how will you prepare for the exam? This is fairly common for other faculties also. I know that there are students from faculties, not only medicine and other faculties also in this audience. So I've tried to pitch it to people who from different groups. So lectures, one important point about lectures is, you might be used to taking down detailed notes, but there could be some techniques we can use to listen to the lecturer, because you see, when lecturers come to deliver their lecture, most of them have studied the content, and they want to give you a broad picture of that topic and try to explain difficult areas, because the details are there anyway in the textbooks, right? And it's there in Google. You go to any of these sites and you get the necessary facts. So the teachers try to explain these facts. And therefore, if you go on writing, you could miss the event. It's like when you're at a party, instead of enjoying the party, you're trying to film it in your mobile, right? So that's not what you should be doing. You should be listening to the lecturer while making a few notes. So that's a technique you have to learn. And there are two types of lectures now. One is the live lecture, which is the tough one, because you're having what we call synchronous. It's live, it's in front of you. It's happening in front of you. So if you have synchronous lecture, okay, so you should prepare for your lecture. Now, preparation means just to know what the topic is and an outline, asking yourself, what do I know about this? If you have time, just glance through that topic in a textbook. Okay, just glance, just at least the headings, because the prepared brain, the prepared mind is able to absorb more. That's the principle. The prepared mind is able to absorb more. So if you just spend just less than 5 minutes just to prepare, you will absorb much, much more. And during the lecture, head up and pen down. That is, you're looking at the lecturer. You're looking at what the lecturer says, not the duty of the lecturer, but just to look at the lecturer, right? And listen to what the person is saying. Listen to the slides he or she is projecting. And then you have to make your notes. And after you complete the lecture, also you have to process your notes. Again, should be done as soon as possible. And there's a gap usually we try to give between lectures. And that's the time you should quickly try to complete your note. Okay, you complete your note. And when you do this, automatically you're learning certain content areas, right? This whole process itself helps to, you start learning things from the very beginning of your lecture. Now, how do you make notes? There are several techniques. You decide on the technique, but try these out. One famous one is the corner method, where you divide the page. You divide the page. There's you have the cues or the clues or whatever, the major key points, and then you have the place where you add your notes, and then you summarize. So some of these you fill later on. During the lecture, you're just filling these areas. And so we'll say about a disease, etiology. So you might say etiology. So here it might be diabetes mellitus, etiology. You can develop concise sentences, can have your own symbols, abbreviations, lists, and so on. So mostly you fill these up. So these are not hard and fast rules, but this is the sort of where you build your note. Okay, so you build your note. So here also you'll be able to summarize the key points, and these are all useful when you start to revise. So then the next one, I used to use this method quite a lot, that is out topics, and you just jot down according to the subtopic. So diabetes mellitus, etiology 1, 2, 3, clinical features 1, 2, 3, and maybe write a few sentences there. So that's another way of doing it. This is the sort of the type of things we often do in Sri Lanka, I must say. And then this mapping method, this is something I used to use quite a lot. That is to even try to map it so that, and there are techniques called mind maps. Mind maps is a trademark system of doing this. There are several books on mind maps where you write the topic in the middle, and then after that you draw lines and have encircled subtopics, and from the encircled subtopics you can again have branches. You can have it this way, and you can have multiple branches. So diabetes mellitus, etiology, so you might say genetics, then you can say single genetic disorders, and then you can say polygenic or whatever, right? Then you can say diet and refined sugar, low fiber content, and so on. So you're drawing a map. Now, this is also a very interesting way of making notes. And if you practice this, it helps to make notes fairly fast. And the people who proposed this, Tony Buzan, is the guy who started this off in 1980s. He says that this triggers the visual part of your memory also, so that you start remembering the picture of the map, and that helps to remember. And also from this map, you can start drawing connections. So if you're talking of, we'll say the etiology, and there might be a clinical feature, and you might draw another line from one to the other. So it helps to, bring in some discussion also into your note. So this slide shows you other ways of making notes. That's one thing, is to look at charts, and then also to box your notes. So in your charts, for example, main topic or example would be compare the type 1 versus type 2. The main topic could be diabetes mellitus, and on subtopic A, it could be type 1 diabetes. Subtopic B is type 2 diabetes. And then you'll be jotting down the points, the different points. So this you might do during the lecture, but most likely you will have time to do this after the lecture. Can you remember I told you, you have to prepare, then you do during your lecture, and after that, you have to learn to complete your notes. Right? So boxes, again, is another way of categorizing. See, when things are given in chunks, it's easy for you to remember, right? When things are given in chunks. So when you give it in boxes, so subtopic A might be etiology. Subtopic B might be clinical features, right? Subtopic C might be investigations. So you are chunking them, and then your mind is able to grasp it and remember, right? Next slide, please. Right, so a slightly different strategy is used when we use for recorded lectures, right? A slightly different strategy, because in a recorded lecture, you can pause and re-listen and make your notes, but it's always important that you go through the lecture once, because when you go through the complete lecture, you get an idea as to what the lecturer wanted you to do, wanted to teach also, right? Okay, so let's now, we have talked about lectures. Next, we will do about studying and how we should plan your studying. Now, remember, though we use the term studying, it is in fact learning, right? Just studying for 6 hours is useless if you are not learning from it. So in order to learn properly, you have to have certain, you can think of it in certain easy to remember ways of learning, right? So I'm not going to go into detail, but I will want again to give you main chunks about learning. So you have gone for your lectures, you have gone for your tutorials, and you have gone for your practicals. Now, when you go to your hostel or back home, how are you going to learn? How are you going to use this material? How are you going to refer from the internet or whatever other resources and learn? So now it's you can classify this as timetabling, the importance of timetabling. Second thing is your environment, and then what exactly you would do during this process of learning. What would you do during this process of learning? So 2 points. One is these are extraneous to the whole process. That is, you should have some timetable. That's important, okay? And you should think about the environment you're studying in. Now, next slide, please. So, next slide. Yes. So, if you are able to plan your time, it's always good to have it in a visible area. So, it could be on the wall or your diary. Now, of course, most of you all have it in your mobiles. Okay. So, you have to have at least a weekly timetable when it comes to your studies. Other things you might not want to, you might want a bit of freedom to be flexible. But when you look at your study time, as an undergraduate, you should have some sort of commitment to block out your other commitments, but to block certain time periods for you to study. And when you are doing that, you have to chunk it. So you don't say, I'm going to study from 9 p.m. till 12. You chunk it, right? 9 to 9:30, small break, 9:35 or 9:40 to 10:40 or 10:30, and so on. Now, in these, you should note what sort of topics you're going to study. That's important, so that you are covering all the subjects done during the day and during the week, right? So it's important that you chunk it and you include all the subjects. There are apps which can be used now in your mobiles or your computers. And also remember, you must have adequate sleep. Sleep is essential. In your timetable, you must have adequate hours blocked out to sleep. You see, it's during that time that when you are learning something new, what happens in your brain is that there are new connections being formed. And when you are sleeping, those connections get consolidated and the useless connections go off. So it's during the sleep, during the period of sleep, that what you have learned gets solidified, and you will feel fresh the next day, and you will remember things which you studied if you allow adequate sleep. Okay. Next slide. Now, this is a technique which is used for timetabling. That is, it's something to do with tomato farming, actually. So you have chunks of 20 minutes each, 20 to 25 minutes, right? You work, then you take a short break. Work, short break. Work, short break. Work, short break. Then you have a long break. After work, long break, right? So you see, when you're having such breaks, it helps to consolidate some of the knowledge. So you will have you will eat, you will learn a certain area, short break, learn certain area, short break, learn certain area, short break, and then you have a long break. So you're talking of chunks in your timetable. Okay, so the important principle is when you're timetabling, you timetable in advance, you timetable to cover all the subjects every day if possible, and you chunk it, you break it into pieces, right? Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is about the study environment. Okay, now again, this is a key thing. So timetabling is one. Second thing is about multitasking. You see, you have to remember that your generation has many more distractions than our generation. We never had internet, we never had mobile phones. In fact, we didn't have television. We had only radio. Okay, so it is a massive transition for us. But you feel the difference, because when we were without mobile phones, without televisions, and only relying on radios and a few transistor radios, you see, there was less distractions to your mind. We had less information coming into our minds. We had less tasks which we were doing at the same time. Okay? Whereas you fast forward and look at your lives, you have the mobile phone which is giving you alerts. You sit in front of your desktop or your laptop, and you can listen to your music as well as watch a film, and then do your look at some slides. So you have got exposed to a world where information is being bombards you. So from the time you're getting alerts, there are small surges of dopamine, and these have been researched by the people who are doing those alerts. They know that you get hooked onto it, right? You get hooked onto it. You are almost addicted to these multiple information packages which are coming in Facebook, in WhatsApp groups, and so on. And the urge to resist it, it's difficult. So next slide, please. You see, this goes back to the science of attention. When you're listening to a lecture or you're reading a book, your mind is giving attention to something. Now, your mind can give attention to something, one thing at a time. Your conscious mind can give attention to only one thing at a time. So when you're reading, if your mobile phone rings, your attention is broken. If there is a loud noise, your attention is broken. If you listen to certain types of music, your attention is broken. Why I say certain types is some people find it calming for certain types of music in the background, right? They have got used to it. That's a different story, right? But if your place where you are seated has a lot of other books and other things which draw your attention to, again, your mind is drawn to those. So it's important that your environment reduces this multitasking, at least when you're studying. Okay? And in order to help you to learn to gain attention or to be focused, techniques such as mindfulness or meditation are helpful. Okay? And also, again, adequate sleep is important in this whole preparation of your mind to studying. And you should avoid stimulants, too much tea, and all these drinks, which the fizzy drinks, some of which have a lot of caffeine, right? Those will not help you in drawing attention, right? Smoking, alcohol, and drugs, no, right? There's no question about it, about using those, and those will cloud your mind. It will not make your mind clear. Okay, so these are some of the things in the environment. So we've talked about timetabling, the importance of timetabling, and then the importance of the environment. And the key one is to reduce multitasking. And then now, since you all are in this new digital age, there's this concept of a personal learning environment, PLE. Next slide, please. Yes, now that is, you see, in our period times, we used to have books and notes and textbooks and notes. That's it. Okay. Now you have a totally different range of learning tools. So if you're talking of a topic, or if you're talking of a subject, not only would you have your notes, you will get into the computer and you will have a whole new learning environment in relation to a topic. Now, I am no expert in this area, but I want to give you some direction to understand this. That is just like us having journals and our notes and having textbooks. You can also have a different set of resources for each topic or discipline from your computer. We'll have lectures, you may have iBooks, downloaded certain articles, you would have downloaded certain experts, you would have your own notes. Some of you will be using iPads and making notes, which you will have now in your computer. In your cloud or in somewhere. Personal learning environment. So that's another environment which we have to acknowledge and you should seriously think about. Okay, so we talked about the environment, we talked about the timetable. Now, how do we really study is the next question. How do we really study? What's the process we would do to study? How do I study? Right, next slide. Yes, this is one. Yeah, this slide. Okay, right. So one is, it should be a planned process ideally. So you should know, I am going to study the presentations and management of diabetes from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And you might not go into the details of chunking it, right? But you know that you have to at least look at the clinical features, the investigations, and the management, maybe 3 chunks, right? So why is that? Because then if your mind is prepared for that topic, this is what I'm going to study at the beginning, then you learn better. Right? Remember, it's not the studying time, it's what you learn. So if your mind is prepared to learn on a topic, you will learn better. Okay, so those are a few things. And then you start to, now you want to understand about the topic, right? Okay, next topic. Yes, next slide. Yes. Now you have to read, you have to understand. You see, why do you want to understand? Because if you understand something, you will retain it in your mind. It goes into your long-term memory. If you understand something, it will go into your long-term memory. And it is important that you get things into your long-term memory. Right? Why? Because then you have to study less closer to the exam, because it's already in your long-term memory. Okay, so you have to read to understand. You will have to read your notes. You will have to read the books. You might want to listen to your YouTube channel, and you might indicate that in your corner note or whatever to check on that, right? And you might have a few diagrams which we use to understand what's happening in a particular disease. You can use a mind map. Right? So those are visual ways of doing it. So when you try to read about a topic, we say diabetes, and you want to read and understand about it, there is what we call the 3R technique. Next slide. Yes. So you read a section. You read the section. Then you close that and you try to recite it, speak aloud. Right? So you have studied about diabetes, epidemiology, and etiology. Then now you close the book and you see how much you can mention about diabetes. Right? Diabetes is defined in such and such a way. This is sort of, it's common in such and such age group, and we are seeing it increasingly in Sri Lanka and globally. And now you go on trying to recite. Once you recite, you gain. Okay, this is why 3R. And the more you do this, the more you will remember it. The more you will understand. Now, when you are reading this, again, it's not just words just to memorize and recite it. No, you're trying to read the section, and it's a problem for people. Difficulty in fluency in relation to English. So when you read, you might have to understand, you might find it difficult to understand. So you will have to understand the words, the concepts in Sinhala or Tamil. Okay? And then slowly you will understand what the sentence means. Okay? With time, you will be able to think also in English. It will take some time. Initially, you might understand things easier and better in your own mother tongue, but with time, you will learn to understand these things in English. Okay, so it might take more time, and this is why study techniques are important, because during the first few months or years, some students will find it tough to understand the text. But please try to use a translator, a translation, translate the words and try to understand. Don't try to memorize. Don't try to memorize. If you memorize, it will, you have to memorize certain things, but if you're trying to memorize concepts, you will not be able to apply those concepts later on, because you will forget those. You cannot have a full, several textbooks memorized in your brain. Okay, Right. So that's about understanding. But at the same time, there are things which are required in your memory. Unfortunately, there'll be certain things which are required in your memory. So if you want to memorize, you can use various other techniques. You can use words. You might want to memorize certain words. You might have to memorize definitions, right? So diabetes is when the blood glucose level is such and such. You have to know that. That you have to memorize, that it should be above a certain milligrams percent or millimoles, right? That you can't you can understand the principle, but you have to memorize that value. So there'll be certain things which you memorize, and to memorize, if you think of those, when you're going around the road, even when you're walking, even you can think of some of these, you can recall some of these, and that's useful. But certain things, it is important to verbalize. That is, you have to write it down or say aloud. Now, for example, definition of diabetes. What's the definition of type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes? You might want to memorize those. You understand the principle, but you'll have to memorize those, and then you'll be able to state those, right? Next slide. Oops, no, previous slide, sorry. Yes. Now, there are tricks for memorizing. The more you recall, the more it will be in your memory. The more you actively recall, that active recall is not to look at the book and try to read what the definition of diabetes is, but when you're walking down the road, to think, what's the definition of diabetes? Or while you're walking, what are the features of ECG changes in a acute coronary syndrome? Right now, you're trying to recall. The more you recall actively, the more it will stick in your mind. Okay. And then there are little tricks where you use mnemonics. A famous one is Vibjoy. I'll use this this is about the rainbow, the colors in the rainbow, right? Or prism, when the color gets white, light gets is broken down into these different colors. Or some of the mnemonics are on words, auditory. Oh, bloody Mac Perry was a mnemonic given by Professor Carlo Fonseca. When you want to look inside the eye, shining a light to look at the fundus, optic disc, blood vessels, macula, and periphery. These are the areas you must look at. Okay, so that's a mnemonic. So when you are studying, see, you have timetabling. You have talked about the environment, and I have talked about the process itself. That is, in the process itself, you're studying to understand. And when you want to study to understand how you do it, and then there are certain things you have to memorize and how you can memorize. Okay, but then you have to consolidate, right? Next slide. And that is when you do questions. You do questions, you quiz yourself, or you go to a group and you study. Let them ask you questions, right? And then that's how in your quiz, you can look at any sort of, some of these chapters give, after the book chapter, there are certain questions they ask. You can look up some questions which they have asked previously, and so on. So whatever questions related to that subject, we consolidate what you have learned. Consolidate. And please remember, you should be asking yourself questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions from yourself. My former teacher, Mr. Errol Fernando, he died. He was a tuition teacher. He used to say, you ask yourself all the possible questions in that syllabus so that the examiner has no questions to ask you. I follow that even now. So whenever, even on any topic, I try to ask myself questions. Of course, sometimes there are lots of instances where others have better questions than what I have asked myself. But if you go on asking yourself questions, your views, what you have learned gets consolidated. Okay. So now let's, are we okay for time? Is it okay, Priyat? Am I going on?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can go.
Right. Okay. So next is preparing for exams. Preparing for exams. Okay. And you see, when you're preparing for exams, what are you going to revise? How are you going to revise? And how do you know you have learned? Right. So what are the ways of preparing for an exam? What will you revise? How will you revise? And how do you know that you have revised enough? So next slide. Yes. So this gives you what you should revise. Strategic. Now, remember, one thing very important is you have to love your learning. You have to love your learning. So you have to love the work you're going to do. Otherwise, you're in the wrong place, right? You can't do something you hate for the rest of your life. Learn to love it. So learn to be inquisitive, learn to love your subjects, which you have some certain areas you might not like. I also don't like certain areas, but broadly, you have to love what you're going to study, okay? But when it comes to the exam, you're more strategic. You're strategic because now you have to pass that exam. You have to pass that exam. So how are you going to revise to pass the exam? So very simple. You see, your exams are set by your teachers, and therefore the lectures by your teachers will be very important points for you to revise, right? There would be outcomes, objectives, and so on given in the faculty notes, faculty staff handbook. But remember, it is the lecturers who are going to, the lecturers and professors in the departments who are setting the papers, and they are going to tell you things which they think are important. So what they say is going to be important for your exam, for you to pass. Point number one, look at the past papers because they have set the past papers and they have thought through and thought those are the questions which are important to ask and things which are important for you to know. So therefore go through the past papers, not to memorize the answers of the past papers, but to use the past papers to learn around the topic. Okay, learn around the topic. Don't just limit yourself to answering that question. A lot of students we have seen are memorizing answers to MCQs. Now the chances of you getting the same MCQ at the next exam is less than 0.00001. I mean, we don't repeat questions like that. And even if we repeat, out of the 100 questions you are memorizing, you think we are going to ask all those 100 questions we are going to repeat? No, we might repeat 2. Okay, you repeat 2. So now you are studying 100 MCQs, memorizing the answers for 100 MCQs, thinking that there would be 2 MCQs which are going to be repeated. Absurd. So don't memorize answers. Learn around it. They give a clue to what is important because the examiners are setting those. Okay. So this gives you a broad picture of what you have to study. A broad picture. So you have to have that broad picture and you start to fill it as you go along. Last few days, you might be filling the details, right? But otherwise, you must have that broad picture in your long-term memory. That's why you have to learn to study. You have to learn so that you know the concepts. And also, when you're revising, use one set of notes or one book in a particular subject to revise so that you are going through that. Because part of the notes you remember automatically as part of your visual memory. right? When you go through, suddenly you can picture the page, what you have written, or you might picture a diagram in the textbook, which helps you to answer. Okay, so this gives you what you are going to now revise. Next slide will tell you how will you revise. Preparation begins from day one. Okay, very important. From day one, you should be reading your notes and finishing the work you did on that day. You might do sports, you might have gone out with your boyfriend or girlfriend, but you better come back and at least glance through your notes and recall what happened on that day. So if you have a timetable, you will be okay. We'll say if you are youngsters, you will be breaking the timetable. I mean, we always do. That's occasionally we do. We don't stick to our timetables. Suddenly you might get a call from a friend who will say, "Yam Machan, let's go and see a film." So you go. But then, even if you go, keep half an hour or so just to at least glance through. So it's important. Preparation begins from day one. And as I told you, you'll be studying to understand. Right? So this is, again, important, because don't worry about these facts, minor facts. You want to dump them in your long-term memory. If you understand, it will stick there. Right? It will stick. And if you have it in your long-term memory, you will not forget it. Some of the things we have learned, we haven't forgotten. I mean, we can remember things we studied 40, 50 years ago. Of course, they have got reinforced as we go along. Then the other point is interweaving. That is, now if you're revising also, you don't revise. Now we'll say you have now got your study leave. You have got your study leave. How am I going to finish this revision? Now, you don't say, today is my biochemistry day, tomorrow is my physiology day, day after is my anatomy day. No. Interweave. That is, you have to do all the subjects, or at least a few of the subjects every day. Right? Because otherwise, the more you are not familiar, the faster you forget. The faster you forget. Right? So interweaving, so that is part of your timetabling. So when you are having your study leave, right? Study leave is just the last lap. You have actually started preparing from day one. You have started to understand from day one, but there will be certain things you want to understand during your study period also. Right? But during your study period, you will interweave. You will have different topics on the same day. Okay, so how will you revise? What will you revise? You can use your lectures, you can use the slides, you can go to the LMS and listen. You will have your diagrams, you will have the various flow charts, the notes you have made, right? And also, this is the stage you are strategic. So you are now looking at past papers and trying to say what sort of areas are likely to come. So next slide, please. Yes, so you will know the areas you are now going to study, and you will use the lectures and diagrams and all these things in your revision. All right. Next slide, please. Yeah. So finally, now we are coming to the end of it. How will you check whether you have learned? Important point I told you before. Question yourself all the time. Even after a lecture, just question yourself. Don't be frightened of yourself. Okay. And there are other ways, like you can have flashcards which ask questions. You can use your notes, corner noting system is useful there, because there are certain things which you write on the left in your corner notes, those key points, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you cover your note and you look at only the key points, you should be able to say, what are the things I have written in my notes? If I look at these key points, can I remember what I have written on the notes, right? So you should be recalling. So even when you relax for 5 minutes and then another 5 minutes, you might say, right, I'm going to recall what I learned today. And then might just, recite what you have learned. I have learned today about drug therapy in management of patients having type 2 diabetes. And these are the principles, right? Then of course you can have group discussions, because different people can have different points of view. They will learn differently and they will have their own questions. Okay. And of course, past papers, as I mentioned. Past papers. Past papers from your faculty and other faculties also, or from books. Right? There'll be past papers in other universities, and which you should be able to answer. Right? Okay. So next one is the final slide. So what I've tried to do is to chunk 3 areas on the sort of studying which happens in the faculty. One is related to lectures, how you take the maximum out of lectures, and that is preparation before, taking appropriate notes during, and then completing your notes afterwards, because that becomes your document. Why is it important? Because it's the lecturers who are setting your papers. It's the lecturers who have decided what is important for you. Okay. The second point is about studying. So how to plan your studying. See how important it is about the timetabling, how important it is for the environment, and the key thing, don't think that multitasking is good. Multitasking is not good for you to learn. That's not something which is all the cognitive scientists and people are saying, no, multitasking as a general rule is not a good way for a person who is studying. And then of course the studying process itself, you have to focus on, you love the subjects and understand it. If you have to really memorize, you might have to have mnemonics, and you might have to have certain funny things which you try to visualize and so on to remember. But those are minor points, right? Those are minor things. Then preparation for the exam, starting from day one. How important it is to take timetable. How important it is to know what is the sort of area which they might ask, right? Because that's something which will tell you where to aim your studies, and then revise. That you'll be revising using mainly the notes, and use a single set of notes which you will use to revise, because then it becomes part of you, right? And of course, when you revise, always question yourself, so that I've asked all the possible questions which they can ask, which anyone can ask from you. Right, so I'm sorry about the initial hiccup with the internet, something which has rarely happened, but anyway, there was some problem here in this area, I think. So any questions? I think I will stop there now because we have run out of time. Priyat? Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, for that most insightful and thought-provoking session. Even though we had some technical difficulties, I'm sure that all the participants would agree that was the insight that you gave us through that lecture would be very valuable in their future academic careers. Even I myself learned a lot of new things, some mistakes that I was also doing during this, even when preparing for exams. So I'm also a person who does not do a lot of questions. So Like that, I also learned a lot, and I'm sure all the participants here would have also learned. So thank you very much, sir, for taking your time amidst your busy career, busy schedules to take your time to do this session for us. So now we would like to move on to the question and answer session. If you have any questions, you can direct them through the chat.
Yeah, once you get the chat box, you ask me the question. It will be easier because I'm on the phone. Yeah.
So there's one question in the chat. Sir, how to study if someone is having ADHD-like behavior when the Pomodoro method does not work?
Yeah, now ADHD, of course, if now I also have that problem, I must say, in the sense, see, my attention span is also very tight. It's very, very, I get easily distracted. So firstly, you try to use an environment where there are less distractions, and certainly I didn't have the problems of a mobile phone in the time I studied, but now even, I mean, we still study, right? That's something you must remember. Some of us are still studying for hours sometimes because we love it. Okay, we love it. We want to understand what is happening to our patients. We want to understand what is happening in the world around us, and so on. So in such instances, you minimize the disturbances which you can have. Okay, and then also I find that now if I am on the social media, it becomes if I'm on the social media for a period, the period which follows immediately afterwards is not very calm. Is not very calm. Whereas if I want to calm myself, I read some book or something which interests me and focus my attention not on the study subject, but on something else. And then I feel calmer and I'm able to study. So that's one thing we have to do. Reduce your distractions, reduce the distractions. And you have to be in an area where it's calm. And I'm amazed at some people who are able to focus attention. And even if you go and talk to them, they can't see you because they are focused on what they're doing. They have that ability to focus and be attentive to what they're reading. So that's an amazing ability. So you can try these tricks, and certainly if you're taking stimulants, tea, coffee, and some of these high caffeine drinks, which all increase your adrenergic nervous system, you should avoid those, and hopefully you will be able to study. But if it is really difficult, there are other things even before that. You can also do mindfulness or meditation where you're trying to draw attention to either breathing and the sensations in the nostril or whatever for a period of time. Again, those are ways of learning to be attentive. Now, if all these are not helping, you should be getting professional help. So there's our counselor programs in the universities, and they will they will speak to you, and they will put you on to a professional. The psychologist, or in rare instances, the psychiatrists also are able to handle these. So it could be a psychologist or a psychiatrist who will help you to do a few mental tricks and help you to be able to focus. So in a nutshell, you try to reduce the distractions, then you do things to practice attention, like meditation, mindfulness, or reading a book, or something which helps you to learn to focus. And if that all these fail, you have to seek professional help. Or you can seek professional help early. I mean, that doesn't, you haven't to wait and suffer through. You just can ask them and they will put you through to a professional who is able to handle this. Very, very rarely that there will be drugs necessary, treatment necessary. Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you, sir. And there's one more question. Sir,
Yeah.
is there an effective method to catch up any missed lessons fast during the limited period of study leave before an exam?
Is there a method? Well, that depends on how much you have missed out and how much you have to, and the faculty and so on, because some of these are available on the LMS. Your colleagues would have written down the notes, and you have to then find out from the textbooks and other resources of what you have missed. What you say is, it's an important question because this is a practical question. When you miss a lecture or miss several lectures, for example, you suddenly realize that there's a large chunk which you're not familiar with. You're not familiar with, because when you go to a lecture and you listen to a lecture and you are going to to lectures on a regular basis, even though it is boring, even if you have slept through some of these, you see, you do recall some of the important points. After the lecture, you see, you will remember. So when you're away from lectures, what I find is that it's as if I have missed out something. And then I find it difficult to get back that bit of knowledge which I lost. Now, that's completely a personal experience. I mean, there are people who never went to lectures or cut most of the lectures. So that's a personal thing. But how are you going to sort this out? Well, I mean, there's no other way other than looking up at the LMS. Now, I know some of you all are recording the lectures now. Ideally, they should be recorded only after getting permission from the lecturer, but that's something we can't enforce. But we know that there is the whole lecture series which is there in your dark web of all the lectures. So you can listen to those lectures and then you will understand what the lecturer mentioned, has told, and then you will, that's the only way. And then of course read up and try to catch up. Yeah, so those are some of the ways you can catch up. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And there's one final question. It's about the use of background music when studying. How effective, or is it a good thing or a bad thing, sir?
Yes, you see, that's a personal issue, because there are certain studies have shown that some of the classical music, and of course, most of these studies are done in the West, but I'm sure some of the very calming Eastern music, the ragas and things like that, also have an equally beneficial effect. So certain music at a certain volume, up to a certain volume, seem to be helpful for people. Now, there is no general rule, that's the problem. Now, for me, problem is if I have music, my attention goes to that music. So periodically, my attention is breaking. And at this age, of course, I don't mind it. So what? I'll enjoy the music as well as do my reading. I have no deadlines, right? But when you're having deadlines and when you have to study certain things and you're going for an exam, you have to minimize those distractions. So the answer is there is no 100% true or 100% wrong answer. You have to find out which type of music at what sort of volume may help you. But when you are studying, if your attention gets to that music, that means you're breaking your attention. I told you, if you're at a given time, your mind is able to be attentive to a single area, not to multiple areas. There's no parallel processing. Its attention is on one thing. So when you're multitasking or when you're hearing something, your attention is going from one to the next and coming back. Sometimes it happens so fast that you think you are doing both at simultaneously, parallel, but you are not. So it's a thing which you have to find out whether you want to have music or not. And now, of course, you've got earphones which knock off external sounds. Through they're able to block all external sound and give you complete silence. It's a bit expensive, but you have earphones which actually knock off external sound. So I would expect people who have difficulties in attention to find it very useful. Right? Sometimes I find just covering my ears and reading or listening to, reading something helps because I get less distracted. So answer to that question depends on you. Find your ideal and go according to what you feel is the best for you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And I think that's all the questions that we have received so far. So thank you very much, sir, again for doing this session for us. It was very helpful, very valuable. We gained a lot of insight on things that we thought we knew, but actually we have not done it in an ideal way. So thank you very much again, sir, for teaching us all this. And from the very first year in which you did lectures for us, one quite unique thing about this, the way you teach the emotions, the attitudes that you have in order, you really want the students to learn and succeed. And that is reflected in the way you teach. So that is quite unique thing. And we are very fortunate to have learned from you. And I hope that the new students who in the 2020 LL batch also gained a lot from this. They gained an opportunity to learn from you, sir. So thank you very much, even amidst all the other responsibilities and your busy schedules. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this for us, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And with that, we move on to the conclusion of this session. In the chat box, we have put the link for the Google form that has the post quiz. So it has questions that are based on the content that was covered during the session. And please fill that in order to mark your attendance. And since we had to undergo some technical difficulties during the session, we will be uploading a recording of this session, complete recording in our YouTube channel, in the Road Club Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo official YouTube channel. We will be uploading a recording. So all of you can also refer the recording and afterwards you can fill in the session. And as I mentioned before, we will be having a lot of activities planned out for you throughout the next week. And we hope you will take part in those, and so that you will get an opportunity to practice actually what you learned. That is it for this session. And with next week on Saturday, we will be having a similar session on habit building, how to build good habits and how to break the bad habits. So we will hope to see you soon with another session. Thank you very much for joining us with us tonight. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.